So suppose I could tell you there's really just one thing that you need to have in your life, health life, that is far and away better than anything else you could do, or I should say take, and it's free, but it takes a little effort. There's just one thing, absolutely. Some people actually do take this thing, they pay for somebody to give it to them. And this thing is called growth hormone, specifically human growth hormone, HGH. You don't have to pay for it. You don't have to pay for anybody to do it or give it to you at any special dose, but it's extremely important. And I would say by not doing this thing we're going to talk about today, you actually accelerate your aging. You're older than you have to be. And by doing this thing to give you free growth hormone on a regular basis, you actually become younger. We'll talk about that as well. This has a lot to do with what they call the methylation clock, has a lot to do with reversing a number of conditions. So let's get to it. What if I told you I could make you younger? What if I told you I'm making myself younger? What if I told you if you did this one thing, there's nothing you have to take. If you did this one thing a few times a week over a period of years, you will age out of your particular age group and be younger. They will get older. And actually it's something that you should be doing anyway. But if you do it correctly, you'll really get some exquisite results. And so what is that exactly? We're talking about human growth hormone. Human growth hormone, not something that you take. It's not a special supplement. It's basically stressing yourself over a particular short period of time, a few times a week, that your body will then have to respond. And then it recuperates. And then it responds. And then it recuperates. And it sounds simple enough. That's in essence the whole recipe. We'll get into some details, of course, and you'll see some examples of it. But that's the gist of it. That absolutely is the gist of it. It's simplicity personified, but it also is very effective. It's what I do. It's what my wife Judi does, and a number of other people. Let's get to it. So what we're talking about is exercise. Pretty straightforward, but it's not all exercise. If you're a person that doesn't do any exercise, hasn't done any exercise, then something is better than nothing, and you will get this particular benefit that I'm after. But it really comes down to something much more focused, and I hate to sort of say disciplined. It's something you're going to have to do for yourself. And it is so powerful over time. I've seen the transformation in others. I've certainly seen it in myself. And now it's time to implement it. But what I want to talk about is the effect of growth hormone. So human growth hormone, which you can generate yourself. And there's two ways that you can generate it. One is by stressing yourself. That is, and I'm going to show you how to do this, stressing yourself to the point for very short periods of time that you actually connect with your adrenal glands, and you force yourself to metabolically feel like that bear is chasing you through the woods. It's extreme, and you can do it. It's been done again and again and again. It's actually called slow high intensity exercise or training, slow HIT. We spell it, we don't say it. And this is something that's incredibly powerful. So that's one way, and we're going to go into some details there. The other way is if you fast. You know, when you fast for a period of days, if you fast for too long, it becomes starving. And if you starve for too long, you eventually die. We're talking about a very short period of not eating food. And so you could say intermittent fasting, which is not eating all the time, really helps to drive up and create hormone, human growth hormone for yourself. So that's the second way. The third way, I'm going to have to show you on some labs, which is not particularly a good way for that to happen. I'll leave that as a secret, but you'll be fully explained by the end and understand what that is. So two ways. One is by fasting, and the other is by slow, high-intensity exercise. Pretty incredible. So we're going to talk about the number one hormone that can make people younger, make you younger, if you care to be younger, if you care to be as young as you possibly can. It's free, and I'm going to show you what you need to do to get that to happen. It's important. And it's a big deal. Okay, most people think the trouble with getting older is you lose your muscle mass, sarcopenia, and you lose your mind. Dementia, Alzheimer's, ALS, name your favorite neurological disease, that's the automatic way it's going to be as you get older. At some point, you're going to have a decade or 2 or 3 of being very compromised neurologically and physically. And guess what? That's not true. But I'm going to show you a factor that I believe is really the top of the list of things that you can do for yourself. I know it's nutrition and so on and so forth, but it's not in this case. It's not. Okay, so pretty straightforward. As you get older, you lose muscle mass. But it doesn't have to be that way. When you get to this area, a zone where there's a high risk of death is associated with muscle loss. So sarcopenia is the #1 all-cause mortality over the age of 60. Therefore, you would think that it would behoove you to keep your muscle mass, right? Either you're going to think about what to take or what to do, or basically just understand the process. And you can not be part of this curve. You'll have to do some work. So you can avoid this, but it is necessary for many people to live in a nursing home. Not saying they're bad, I'm saying that you can take it upon yourself for the most part in terms of what your choices are, that you can be a stronger, healthier, older adult. And when I'm talking about older adult, I'm talking about over 40 at this point. So it all comes down to one thing, growth hormone. The lab results do not lie. So let's take a look. Let's talk about human growth hormone and IGF, insulin-like growth factor. Insulin-like growth factor is the proxy, the vector for growth hormone. As you know, I like to look at labs because that's my context. That's where it's a little more truthful than just getting stories. You go, well, why isn't research good? Research really comes down to opinion papers. You have to look how they're done, how they're structured correctly, and there's a lot of propaganda in studies. I don't dismiss, I read a lot of studies. And you can tell if they're structured well, if it's really dependable information, dependable data that you're looking at, but it has to correlate with some part of your life. And so for me, in this case, it has to correlate with labs of the people that I've seen. Is there a reasonable representation of all these studies about whatever it is I'm looking into with the data that I see? So this is what we're looking at now. We hear a lot about human growth hormone. Gosh, you know, too much of it is dangerous. Not enough of it is everybody's problem. But that's not really the topic at hand, because you can't measure HGH. You can't measure human growth hormone. It's way too expensive. I mean, there is a test, but it's not anything your doctor's going to have. And it's certainly nothing that I test. It's just extremely expensive and very esoteric, and there's not a lot of studies on it. So what we study instead is IGF, insulin-like growth factor 1. And we have that as a correlation. It's a proxy, it's a vector, however you want to look at it. But I want to show you in a larger context how interesting it actually is, and how it is very important, and it's very useful, and there's something that you can do about this. Okay, so here's my spreadsheet of about 19 people, and what I did here, so now you know, I'm going to spin this in front of you. There's a lot of labs that I take, and you know, you go through a lot of these, and anybody who's worked with me knows these. But what I did is I took the one section of IGF, right, insulin-like growth factor, and I ranged it from high to low. And these are just 19 people randomly taken, pretty much the last 19 people that I've seen, that I've worked with. And so what we have is a high of 244 and a low of 54. It's quite a span. Also, in terms of ages, we have a low, as in the youngest, a 16-year-old male, and the oldest is a 77-year-old female. We have quite a span of men and women that we're going to look at to say, you know, there is something here that is real information. And it's not just like, oh my gosh, you have a bad number or you have a good number. This is a number that you can do something about. And this absolutely will change your life. Absolutely will change your life, but it's going to take some effort, and it's free. What a deal. A little effort for something that's free that is going to change your life. Did you hear that correctly? You heard that correctly. So here we have this, but here's the problem. And when we look at all of these things, we're looking at kind of a degree of health. And so this first person here is the young man of 16, and you would expect anybody in puberty or early adolescence is going to be, that's the peak of one's growth hormone. I'll show you growth. So I'm going to use growth hormone and IGF interchangeably. So we're going to see on a scale of what the numbers really should be, but this is reality, right? These are what real people get in their labs. And so the second person, though, is a 40-year-old male, 80 pounds overweight. And you go, huh, that's interesting. The problem is, as you get into diabetes and obesity is that certainly has a lot to do with the food they're eating, is that they can have an elevated level of, obviously they have elevated levels of insulin, right? If they're diabetic, well, elevated levels of glucose and more than likely insulin. So this is the second row right here. That's all the insulin levels. But this is the one we're ranking by. This is the one we're sorting by is down here is IGF. But I want you to see, here we have 40-year-old male. His insulin is 24. What is normal? 2. 2, 3, under 5 is really the maximum that I look at. Even though the range goes up to 19, that's baloney. Anything above 5 is problematic. So there's 24. Clearly there's a problem. So insulin in itself is a growth hormone, and I'm using the word loosely now. And it's so much so that I'll show you later, the bodybuilders inject themselves with insulin because they want their muscles to grow, to hypertrophy. So what we're seeing is self-induced, if you will, obesity or diabetes, growth hormone secondarily, I'm about to say, caused by insulin being high. So here you go, high. But the third level here, we'll get to this person later, they're pretty normal, healthy person. And the other thing I want to point out, this bottom row down here are ways in which we look at insulin resistance. And there's 3 different ways to look at it. We're just going to look at this one row right here and saying, you know, are they insulin resistant or not? It's sort of pretty obvious if they have a high insulin number. So as we go down, I'm going to have to sort out all those that are really diabetic and obese because they are making a lot of insulin, and that makes their IGF be artificially high in my view, okay? It's not a healthy thing for theirs. They're probably drinking a lot of dairy, which has a lot of IGF from the, secondarily from the cows and from the drugs that they've been given. So that's the first thing I want you to know, from high to low, and the lowest is way over here, a woman of 54, I mean a woman of 77 who is 54. And so as we go down, and when you see these red lines, all these red numbers are high insulin. Look at that, 52 for insulin. What was their glucose? Let's scoot up to their glucose number was, if you looked at only their glucose, you go, well, that's pretty normal. Look at their insulin. Yeah, it's sort of a pretty high glucose. So you can have extraordinarily high insulin, but normal, within range, sorta, glucose, and that's a problem. Because the biggest problem is the insulin. Now I'm going to show you the same thing, and I'm going to categorize it a little bit differently. I'm going to sort out those that are obese and diabetic and extremely overweight. So what I did is the same set of data, same 19 people. Now here's what you just saw before. You had the IGF-1 and the insulin. So I put them on top of each other. The nice thing about having a spreadsheet is that you get to look for correlations and associations and relationships, and you get to rearrange the data. It's just beautiful. It's just amazing. Any doctor who doesn't do this are they even practicing medicine? It just totally blows my mind. You can't have a reasonable conversation. They go, oh, there was a study. Well, what's your experience? I don't have any experience. We're not allowed to write, what, they're not allowed to write things down? We know it's highly technical, and they have it right there on their notepad and so on, you know, electronically, but they don't have a spreadsheet. So with all the ease of technology, they don't put it together in a spreadsheet. That's the end of my rant, but here we go. IGF, insulin, HOMA-HR as the insulin resistance number. Anything over 1.4 is insulin resistance. Hemoglobin 1AC, of course, that's important for the diabetes, prediabetes. Anything over 5.7 and greater. Inflammatory marker, HSCRP, which is high sensitive CRP, C-reactive protein, homocysteine, and vitamin D. I can go on more and more. I can, blind you and spin it all up this way to show, but I tried to cull out things that were reasonable. I pulled in cholesterol because everybody wants to know about cholesterol, so we'll compare to that. But here we go now. So what did I do? I put, of that long list that you saw, I put all of those who were insulin resistance, all of those who were insulin resistance to the right. See, all of these here are to the right. So I took IGF and I said, all right, all of those who are insulin resistant are going to go to one side. These are the non-insulin resistant people. These are the healthy people, right? And let's see their numbers of IGF. So when you look at IGF, who is the highest IGF of all these people and who are the lowest IGF? Okay, well, the highest it's a woman, 66-year-old woman who works out 3 times a week doing high intensity training. And you'll find out about that in a second. But then it goes down from there. That's 66-year-old. I'll tell you where the range is later. Female 55, 58, male 58, and it goes all the way down to, here's a woman 77, 54. Sounds pretty low, doesn't it? So what are all these numbers, and who's in range, and what can they do about it? It's a big deal. This is extremely healthy. It's not out of range. Look at the range is huge. So when you look at that, this person is maybe, what, halfway in the range? And yes, it gets more for, less for as you get older and more that you're younger, but it's a comfortable range there. Let's look at homocysteine, which has nothing to do with growth hormone or IGF, but is an independent factor for inflammatory issues. So this person who did so well with their IGF had 6.3 for inflammation. You should have 1 or less, or ideally 0. Why was that? So you look up of all these other labs, you go, homocysteine, that's certainly addressable, easily addressable. Very low vitamin D, easily addressable. Cholesterol is not high in my perspective. There's plenty of papers, look into it. We've talked about this before. That's fine. Look into her. Where's her LDL? Do I have that? I tried to call it out. There's your total insulin. But she has great HDL and she has great triglycerides. And so the ratio of triglycerides to HDL is perfect. It's incredibly good. And that is, you want that ratio to be under 1.5. And of course, she is not insulin resistance. So the only thing she has to worry about is, well, where's this inflammation coming? Homocysteine, I know about her mutations. She just needs to take some B12 and folic acid, B2 and B6, ideally at the same time. She's not a supplement taker, so it's a little bit difficult. And vitamin D, that's easy to address. Send her outside, get some sun, take vitamin D. To keep it simple. I'm not going down that rabbit hole right now. But if you look across, you know, who is healthy, has a decent number, but does or does not. It's such a major component towards health. Here's another person doing great. Their homocysteine is moderate, and we can even go up to what were the omega-6-3 ratios, right? Omega-6-3s have a lot to do. So the omega-6, this person who we just talked about, had a pretty high omega-3, had a pretty good ratio as far as an American goes. It's not 1-to-1 like the good old days, but it's not 20-to-1 like most Americans have. So when you look at this ratio on top of it, it's something we can address. Very straightforward. You either eat fatty fish or you take a supplement, right? So now you're just knocking these things off. It's tremendous. But the IGF, the human growth hormone, takes some work. That represents effort over a period of time to make a change. But now when you look at all these numbers, the people who are insulin resistant, and you'll see their and then you add in things like homocysteine and cholesterol. What else do we have? We have the omega, here's the ratios of omega-3 to 6. You can bet these are terrible. They're already insulin resistant because I told you that. Look at these two men or women. The ratio is pretty typical American, about 18. Their inflammation is moderate, around 3 to 4, and their glucose is 200 in the neighborhood of, and zoomingly high insulin. So looking at these factors, they can be addressed, but IGF, human growth hormone, is something you need to make for yourself. It will change that. If I just worked on that with these people, their numbers would change. Pretty interesting comparison though when you look into the context. Now we're going to get into the academic of IGF. So what does growth hormone, IGF, do, and why should we care about it? Growth hormone directly increases IGF. I've sort of said that, so we use it as a proxy. It's really the only thing we can measure, by the way, as I've just said. It increases fibroblastic growth factor. What the heck is that? That has anything to do with your bones, your joints, your ligaments, and your tendons. That's a big deal as we get older. It's a big deal for athletes as well. Epithelial growth factor, spelled incorrectly. What is that? That's basically all your blood vessels. Creates new blood vessels, tissue remodeling, improves joint pain. It's the ultimate joint healer. Why is high HGH, human growth hormone, important? It's really IGF we're talking about because that's what we measure. It strengthens bone, builds muscle, burns fat, helps blood sugar control, stimulates immune function, supports thyroid, vitality, sleep, cognition. It repairs and grows muscles, tendons, ligaments, bones, collagens, cartilage, and discs. That's pretty important. So for this one thing that's free, I'm going to tell you, encourage you, hope that you take it upon yourself as a personal sense of responsibility to make yourself younger and healthier. So here's what I was saying before. This is basically the range of serum, IGF. So if you had it just exactly what you saw in the labs. So this is that range. And now we're sort of lining it up by, we saw that 16-year-old, he was 220, so he's right here. He's actually low for his age. We saw that woman, 67, she was nearly 200, 180. We'll see her in a second. And we saw the woman, with many people, saw the woman who was 50. Now she is actually low for her age. So these, at least you can get up to the average, is what I'm saying. Get up to the average and you can go higher. You're still comfortably within range. And it is such a resource for your own metabolism, immune, bone, mental, physical. Okay, so here's the woman, 67-year-old female, her expected number was, and I'm measuring from right here, was 100, but she had in fact twice that. Do you think it's going to benefit her? Do you think she's going to start growing some muscle mass or acquiring it? This is a person who had a family history, not a personal history of diabetes and obesity by a lot, times a number of generations. She is not diabetic, nor has been diabetic, but has always had an issue with being able to lose weight. It has transformed her life. You know, insulin is so important as a growth hormone that bodybuilders are actually injecting themselves with it. The reason they do it is because it can't be detected, even though it's illegal in terms of bodybuilding competition. It can't be found, but they can measure for elevated insulin, so on and so forth, and then suspect, but it's not for sure. Clearly, I'm saying that this is popular enough among those who are so driven to be chiseled and have hypertrophy and good definition. This is what they do. Okay, so how to increase it? Sleep, exercise, which we're going to get into, protein intake. Most people don't eat enough protein. You know, that's my perspective. We have a whole program on protein-sparing modified fast and tell people how much protein they should eat and then divide it up over a day. And fasting or intermittent fasting, however long you want to make it as an interval. Enter high-intensity training, otherwise known as HIT. Also, some people refer to as slow high-intensity resistance training, or slow HIT. Here's the concept of that, and it's very important. And I'll show you the how and the why. When you're pushing a weight, exertion has to go to a point that it is so stressful that you actually feel, you get the same response as if you're running for your life. That a bear or a tiger or whatever, you're running away from something to save your life. It is that unequivocal, clear message that happens. What does that mean? You are so sure of it, it goes right to your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands release cortisol. And what does that do? That hits your liver and so on and so forth. And that is threshold. That is threshold right there. So working hard is not the same as threshold. And let me show you. But once you get to threshold, once you get to the top of the mountain in this particular clever diagram, you have the next 2 days of growth hormone that works for your tendons, your muscles, your ligaments, and your muscles. 2 days worth. It only takes you maybe 15 minutes, if that, total. So threshold, where metabolic changes occur. That's this is from Dr. Benkikio, Dr. Vincent Benkikio. All right, your muscles do not adapt to failure, and that's the concept here. You need to bring it to failure. You can't go anymore. It goes to failure, and you need to get to failure between 30 and 60 seconds. So failure is always uncomfortable, and your muscles never adapt to it. Oh, we're going to failure today. That's right, it's Monday morning. No, they don't have a memory. They go, this is very uncomfortable. What are we doing this for? So you never get used to it. What you have is, if you're working with a muscle locally, pick your muscle, legs, arms, chest, whatever, you get a local response, but it also drives an entirely global, body-wide, systemic response, hormonally, vascular, metabolically, and skeletal, as they say in Canada, skeletal. So the mitochondria, you need more energy, right? So the bear is chasing you in the woods, you're at failure, and you're pushing it. You are demanding more energy. So how does that happen? How does that happen? That's where the adrenal glands come in and they make sure you get more energy. And that is a glucose event, by the way. How do you get more energy? Remember, this is it. And this is an emergency. This is not a drill. That is failure. This is an emergency. Aruga, aruga. This is not a drill. Okay, so in a nutshell, this is how you do it. It's whole body, 6 to 10 exercises, not much. We'll show you some. Large to small muscles. So you do legs, right? They're your large muscles. And then you get to arms and maybe calves and so on. We'll show you. Slow and steady, very slow. One set of each exercise, one set of each exercise to failure. Muscles can't count. So the idea of going to a specific number is kind of irrelevant. You got to get to failure. So it's all about getting to failure within 30 to 90 seconds. Between 30 and 90 seconds. You don't just have a good workout, you get to failure that you actually can't make it. So roughly around a minute, you should not be able to go further. And then 2 days of not doing that and let yourself recover. That's really important. This isn't an everyday thing. 2, 3 times a week. Here's another way of looking at it. And this comes from McMaster's University and Dr. Stuart Phillips. And this is you who has just worked out right here. Now this is that 2-day increase of muscle protein synthesis. This is another way of referring to IGF increasing, growth hormone increasing and driving MPS, muscle protein synthesis. So that's increasing regardless of what you do because you already did the exercise. And these little dots are the idea of, in the course of a day, that you eat 4 to 5 times a day of the amount of protein. See my protein sparing modified fast playlist for calculating what you need to do, but you're eating, not continuously, but you're eating intermittent fasting, these numbers of times, ideally 4 times a day for the average person, 5 if you're really on the edge athlete to maximize muscle protein synthesis. But that's it, 5 times there, 5 times there, most eat 4, and so on and so forth. This is what exercise-induced muscle remodeling, exercise-induced muscle protein synthesis. It's amazing. So what's the difference? Here's a master athlete. We're now looking as a cross-section, let's say down their leg. Master athlete, what this shows, and these are definitions over here, we have more mitochondria, that's this little icon here. We have more myofibrillary proteins, that's the whole thing here. We have more capillaries. So it's richer, healthier muscle from working out, we'll say. And here's another thing. As we get older, it's harder for us to create muscle mass. So we have a thing called anabolic resistance. Anabolic is to build. Catabolic is to break down. We don't want to build. We just, no, don't make me build, is what your muscles are saying. It takes that effort. Remember, it takes 2 failure. It takes the lion being after you for you to run with your life, for your life. This is an emergency. This is not a drill. All those things have to be present. For a short period of time, that drives it for 2 days. That's amazing. So we're talking about under 130 seconds of focused exertion is going to benefit you for the next 48 hours. Mind-blowing. All right, so you have an increased muscle protein synthesis. Here's basically where it would be without the exercise, this dotted graph right here. And here's the increase that you do get with working out. Okay, here's another way of looking at it. For everybody, you eat, you get some muscle protein synthesis just by eating protein. But your intervals as you get older breaks down as worse. So you're getting some increase, but more decrease. So this is how you lose your muscle mass over time. Some increase when you eat, you're not eating enough protein, and it breaks down. So you get weaker and weaker and weaker. This is muscle protein synthesis, and this is muscle protein breakdown. But if you add in more protein eating times, so I said here's 4, you can make 5 as I've told you, but just based on the protein and you doing that HIT, you now have, look at the change, you've clearly increased the synthesis, muscle protein synthesis, building muscle mass, helping your tendons, your cartilage, increasing all that. That's a tremendous difference. You will transform somebody's life by doing this, just by doing this. And that's what that icon means, is exercise. So that's the difference. Okay, here's another cross-sectional view of actual situation. 40-year athlete, a 70-year-old athlete. Do you see any difference? In fact, it's better in the 70-year-old athlete. Here's 74 sedentary. The difference is effort. The difference is what you can do. Age-related decline in muscle mass and the protective effects of lifelong exercise. It's all possible, and let me show you how. This is what it looks like in reality. So this is me. It's a bit dated, about a year ago. And frankly, I'm doing it too fast. I'm doing it too fast. We've changed, and now we actually do a count of 10 out and 10 back. Here's doing biceps. That's too fast, but it goes to, as long as it goes to muscle failure within a minute and a half, but within 90 seconds, a minute and a half, you're good. So however fast you want to do it, I wouldn't say you can do it fast. It's meant to be slow, very slow and deliberate. If you want to count to 10, if you want to count to 15 going up, that's fine. But slow, deliberate intensity. Here's another one. It's a leg press. So it's about 500 pounds. And that should be even slower. But you can see the point here. Going to stress, and it should be stressed. And you go slower. First you learn form, then you learn the effort. And here's that 67-year-old woman, this Judi, my wife. She has changed dramatically of what she's been able to do. And this is a year ago. Now she's now seeing for herself that she's building muscle. She didn't think it was possible. Again, she's doing it appropriately. Nice and slow. Nice and slow. Great. Good job, Judi. So, you know, you can do the same example of your home. So here's a picture of me doing a slow push-up on the living room floor with the cats around. So to show it can happen anywhere. You don't need to go to a gym to make this happen. That's just an excuse not to do this.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
So if this is the kind of video that you like, that we go deeper into a smaller area that has a lot of relevance to a particular population, let me know. Because my way is going, what are the labs about? What's the research about? Let's be real. It's just not hypothetical. It's not like, oh, I've read 10 different abstracts and therefore this is the conclusion. I take that idea and let's look at the labs. Do the labs tell the story that we have just learned about in these particular studies? If they do, that's a home run. If not, then it's too esoteric. But let me know if this is something you're interested in. Thanks.